Jerusalem Ridge from Mark O'Connor's fine CD, Heroes, here on KPTZ, where we're welcoming two gentlemen, Wes Cecil, Ph.D., and Milo Redwood, the professor and the madman. Welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just by way of introduction here, I know that both of you have been around for a while. Many people know you, but those that are streaming particularly may not. So I'm going to tell a little bit of background. Milo Redwood, who I'm looking at right now, is a student of philosophy, particularly Greek philosophy, a painter and a singer. I just found out about the painting part. I looked at your website. Very, very nice. Very nice. He's a student of language and word etymologies. Most importantly, and what do you guess? Because Wes wrote this. What do you guess is the most important? Okay, I'm going to leave it alone because that's a pretty casting a pretty wide net. Most importantly, he owns a complete set of the Oxford English Dictionary. Yeah, and so
I just threw that in.
We weigh about the same.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't know that. About the same. That's perfect.
Now, is your mic on, Milo? Say something. I don't hear anything. Do you?
I don't hear it.
Nope. Okay, so we got to work on that. This is not the first time that's happened. Anyone who's listened to Toss Salad knows that does occasionally happen. Let me try this one.
There you go.
Yeah.
There's my
Yeah?
All right.
Okay, there we go. Okay, we're set. Grand tradition of Toss Salad that we don't get these things right the first time. Moving on to Wes Cecil. He's a student of language and literature and has a Ph.D. in English from Indiana University, interested in literature, philosophy, history, and gardening. For the last 16 years, he's been teaching at Peninsula College. When he's not working, reading, or writing, he spends much of his time in his garden, which I just saw a picture of you on your website. You're sitting in the garden. It reminded me of the last scene of The Godfather. But, that's neither here nor there. Recent lectures, An Introduction to Thinking. Was America founded as a Christian nation? So, no stranger to controversial topics. People in town may know you from your lecture series or also from your work with Peninsula College. 16 years is a long time. A lot of young minds influenced, I'm sure. So let's talk a little bit about what we're doing here. How does that sound?
Okay, why not?
Okay. This is the Professor and the Madman. You can take your pick on which is which. There may be some crossover here. The Professor and the Madman is an ongoing exploration of philosophy and its application to the modern world in the form of a dialogue. Together, we hope to present a different take on the key philosophical issues we all face in our lives. So here's a question. Why are we doing this? Why is that important?
Well, Milo and I were just chatting about this today, but just as an example, one that we've been thinking about, I've been thinking about, is this whole concept of guilt. And we take the notion of guilt for granted, but can you think of any example of guilt in the Greek classics?
No, guilt, the etymology, I probably mentioned this, but the etymology is very obscure, and it seems like it goes to crime.
Yeah.
But the guilt, when we talk about guilt now, it's much different. I mean, it seems like our guilt is more mysterious.
Yeah, and so that it's clear that historically, the philosophical history of it is this comes to us from Christianity, which has this idea of original sin, which means that even before you're born, you're already guilty of something, which is a crazy idea. If you think about it, as you're being held responsible for something you could not possibly affect because you might not have even been alive.
Right.
And yet, we have this concept of guilt that just runs through our culture. And so one use of philosophy is to be able to try and think through that, because if you look at a cultural history that's different from ours, the Greek classics, or the Roman classics, the Chinese classics, the Hindu classics, like I said, I can't think of a single reference that has anything even, remotely equivalent to the idea of guilt.
Right. Yeah, you could let yourself down and experience shame, but to have this dark or mysterious guilt, as if you're some kind of a disease on the earth. That just, to the Greek mind, they wouldn't know what you're talking about. Yeah, they wouldn't know.
And so when you read Greek philosophy, I mean, that concern with guilt or with avoiding guilt or getting your sins expiated, again, it's not there. And so when we look at some of the problems or issues that come up, our problems are conditioned by our culture, but so are our responses. And so it's hard to come up with solutions for things when, they may not even be real.
Right.
I mean, we were talking about the whole slavery issue the other day.
Yeah. Yeah, the guilt, it works on, a mysterious guilt works well for an enslaved community because it keeps you down. It doesn't give you anything to work from or to stand on. So if I can teach you when you're a little kid that your existence is a sort of crime, basically you're utterly controlled. So it seems to me like there's a lot riding on the master slave, and then that middle ground, which is delightful to me, which is called the freeborn. I think you'll find it in Plato's Republic. But it's for people, they don't want to be slaves and they don't want to be masters. They want to fall in the middle. They don't want to boss anyone around, but they'd rather be dead than to be a slave. And that would put you in the freeborn. My closest friends are freeborn.
Well, and this is one of the you can think about it educationally as well, is because much of the Greek educational philosophy, which was all homeschool until you were an adult anyway, was to train you that it was better to die than to be a slave. Yeah. Basically, that's you didn't want to have anybody have control of you in that sense. And so not fit in, not get along, but don't be dominated. And so rather than worrying about things like guilt and that we have so much, or they really looked at it as how do I make myself big and free?
Yeah.
Not small.
Yeah. And of course then you have Savior.
Well, you
comes right in there.
Well, right. And then once you have guilt, the concept of guilt, well, now you want some way to be relieved of the guilt. And the notion is, well, if it's amorphous and has nothing to do with you actually as a person, you didn't do anything to be guilty of it, then you need some outside force that's going to make it okay. And is it strange? We were actually talking about this the other day in the terms of, people say, oh, we feel bad, we feel guilty about the slave history of the United States of America, which is bizarre because there's nobody alive today who owned slaves or caused the slave history to exist. It doesn't mean in fact, I would argue that it prevents us from addressing actual problems today, even some which may be a result of that tradition, which certainly exists. But how does it help to feel bad about something you had no control over and you can't do anything about?
Oh, I know how it makes you feel better. It makes you not have to do anything.
Yeah.
It allows you to just take the sideline and go on with the way things are instead of making things more beautiful.
Yeah, it's a type of quietism.
Yeah.
Because you can just go, well, I feel bad, sort of maybe, but structurally I feel bad. I feel guilty, and there's nothing I can do about it. So I don't have to act.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really profound. In the Old English, now when I think of Savior, of course, I think of the word Jesus. And in the Old English, good luck finding the word Jesus in Old English. You won't find it. You'll find healand. And what's really odd is healand, which does go to healer, I believe it would be in the 1400s, probably 1450 in there. There was a choice made. They could have gone either with healer or savior. And for whatever reason, the scribes went with the savior. And that was a huge fork, and it's really hard to find anything on it. You'll find bits and pieces on it, but that was huge to go from calling Jesus healer or savior. If you think about the drama implied with the word savior versus a healer.
Conceptually, this is the guilt issue. A healer heals. If you have a broken leg, a healer can heal you. If you're sort of psychologically or emotionally damaged, a healer can make you feel better. But a savior helps you with all those things that are abstract.
Yeah.
Right? You can't. There's no concrete. It's a different concept. Where does the word savior come from? I don't know the origins of it.
That I'm not so sure. I just remember looking up Jesus in the OED and it going to healing, which it's really profound. Yeah, it's really profound, the difference in healing. There's less drama to a healer. A healer just hopefully heals from the inside out, slowly, beautifully, but slowly. A savior grabs you from the flames of hell. It's
Which is another big difference in philosophical history, is cultures that have no sense either of a afterlife or of an afterlife that has anything to do with what you do in this life. So, Confucius, who apparently believed in some form of spirits, just said it has nothing to do with us, right? You don't worry about it because they're spirits. They don't have anything to do with us. The Greeks believed in a sort of vague afterlife, but everybody went there, so it had nothing to do with anything you did, and everybody said it was terrible. It didn't matter if you were great in this life or terrible in this life. Your next life was terrible. It just wasn't fun because you weren't alive, and the clear thing to do with the Greeks was to be alive. The Romans had virtually none. So even when we think about things like forgiveness, most cultures don't have anything approaching what we think of because there's no chance of going to hell. So forgiveness in the sense of some big metaphysical crisis is non-existent.
Well, I'm going to be very economical with my questions here. But of that, which culture won out? Which are we closest to in our own culture?
Oh, I would argue. I mean, I don't have, without hesitating, I think I would agree with Milo on this one. Even if you do not believe in religion, it doesn't matter. Our worldview is so shaped by that tradition of guilt and sin and afterlife and forgiveness and salvation that our language is just rife with. Here's an example. Would you agree with that, though, Milo?
Oh, sure.
So just if you think of the word virtue, we tend to think of it as being the opposite of vice. That's a Christian reading. In both Latin and Chinese, the words for virtue, in Latin it's virtus. In Chinese, I forget, jin, I think. I forget the word. I think it's jin. There is no opposite of virtue. It's like the virtue of water is that it helps your thirst. The virtue of paper is you can write a note. The virtue of a person is that they can help you out or they're a friend or something. But there's no countervailing vice that is a threat or a shame or a challenge to it. But if we say there's a virtue, we think, oh, there's an opposite of it. And for both in the Latin and the Chinese, just as an example.
Yeah.
I mean, where do you see the influence? That was just one that sprang to mind.
Yeah, no, I think you got it. Yeah, I couldn't add to that. It's perfect. Yeah.
I mean, it's so. Where else do you see the influence? I mean, it's just everywhere. So pervasive, it's hard.
Where do we not?
Where do you not see this? Really, it's so.
Yeah.
When people want forgiveness or things, when people want, when is it not pervasive? I guess here's another example. It's the whole notion of turning the other cheek. This is crazy. I mean, by the way, we have the largest military in the world and the largest military the world has ever seen. So on one hand, we do not follow this at all. On the other hand, we do have this cultural idea that, well, if someone hits you, you turn the other cheek. I always say for the Greeks, the only reason they would turn the other cheeks is because they were temporarily incapable of strangling you. But the second they were going to be able to strangle you, they would strangle you.
Yeah. There. See, now that's in my mind, that's evidence of a slave mentality. A slave doesn't have a choice but to turn the other cheek. But it's not a. See what I mean? That's not. An empowered person doesn't just throw his other cheek out there. It seems counter. But to a slave, what are your options? Of course, you're taught to turn the other cheek. What are your options? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, or the idea of justice. In the ancient world, justice basically meant we're equally strong. Because if I could impose my will on you, I would. And if you could impose your will on me, you would. And we all understood this, right?
Yeah.
And so negotiation was almost always about, well, we're pretty equally matched. So let's see if we can work out something that's fair for both sides. Yeah. But this notion of some overarching divine field of justice is...
Oh, I wish you wouldn't have mentioned that.
Oh, sorry.
This is one that I hear not every day, pretty much every day. Someone will tell me how important justice is to them. Sometimes they'll say love and justice, most important things, and then I'll, through no fault of my own, will say something about a person, and then the same person will tell me, "Oh, you're judging him." So of course I want to know, how do you have justice without judgment? I'm very curious how that, if justice is important to you, then judging others is, I don't see how. And furthermore, what do you care about people's judgments against you? Unless you're in court, what do you care about people's opinions about you? Why would you care about that? Anyway, so yeah, justice without judgment seems impossible.
It's because it's oxymoronic.
Yeah.
It is. It's truly. But we'd say this all the time. We want justice, and we don't want to be judged.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't judge people, but we should have justice.
Right. Only a slave would not judge. That's what a slave had no position to judge.
So we judge all the time.
Oh, yeah.
We pretend that we don't judge all the time.
Absolutely.
Ridiculous.
It's the craziest. It is. It really is. By the way, we have no choice but to judge. I mean, you have to make decisions, which requires discernment, or hopefully requires discernment. Hence, you're judging. You want to judge. Judge so that you will be judged. I think that should be how it reads. I think it's a mistranslation. I'll just say that.
And at one point, maybe Wes looked this up. At one point, I think we found that the real translation was more like prejudgment, that it's best not to prejudge a person. Yeah. But I never saw that in writing, but somewhere I picked up from someone that actually the line, "thou shalt not judge," in the translation, it would have been better to have said, "thou should not prejudge," which really is vastly different than, yeah.
Way different.
Way different.
This may be a little bit off the topic. However, it came to my mind, so I'm going to say it. I spent much of my life working in prisons. And at one point, I won't get into the entire circumstances of this, but Charlie Manson told me,
personally,
true,
in person,
that you only know what you've been told. And I think he was speaking about himself and our interaction. But it's something that, it's one of those, and I hate to just grab any type of wisdom from a mass murderer, but when you think about it, we only know what we've been told unless we delve into, we go outside of what we see. How important is that? I mean, you have to, everything that comes to us is filtered through somebody else unless we take that next step. Because if we're going to know anything other than what we've been told, we have to do a lot of work.
Yeah.
It sounds like you both have done that.
Yeah. See, I think the problem is that the most essential topics get right outside of words. And actually the word ineffable, the reason that's beautiful is because it means unspeakable, beyond fable. Fable, speak, far to speak. So the problem is, say we're talking about love, we love this person, how quickly we run out of words. Same with the word God. It would appear everyone has a little different slant on the word God. Well, the problem is because it's beyond words. And once we start talking words, swords are going to fly, or rather machine gun are going to shoot. So I think the tricky part is the essential human hardness or whatever. You're more apt to find it on a mountaintop, and it probably is not going to be in words at all.
And I think part of it too is I mean, obviously we're both big fans of reading and studying directly, but that's also words from the outside. And at some point you have to stop and say, well, what do I think? Where does this come from? What is my actual experience in the world? Which is often misleading. That's the problem. We can have misleading experiences, and if we draw too many conclusions from them, then we draw the wrong conclusions. But if you don't stop and try, then your thinking is so shaped and your experience of the world is so shaped by outside forces that as an individual, you almost cease to exist. The example, speaking of things that pop into mind on this one, is if people have read 1984, I read this recently, so it's really been pondering about it, the George Orwell book, which is spectacular. His concept there was that there was going to be the big brother, the outside force that really ground all of this into us. It was going to be sort of oppressive. That prediction didn't come true, at least for much of the world. Conversely, the notion of restricting or changing the way we think really has to a significant degree. And the example I like to give is since we've all taken multiple choice tests, is the multiple choice test. In a multiple choice test, SAT or WASL or whatever, Common Core, you have a question and there's one right answer. And that right answer is the answer that the people who made the test know. And so what you're trying to do as a test taker is figure out what thought the people who drew the test up want you to have. This doesn't question you or your experience. Right. It doesn't ask you anything about your world. It doesn't allow you to explain anything that you felt or you've experienced. It says one of these is correct. And I'll give you two examples of how flawed this is. If anybody's ever had the math problem, because math you would think, well, certainly that's not a problem with math. It's particularly a problem with math, actually, is if you've had one of the multiple choice questions that says there's a sequence of numbers, 1 and then 3 and then 9, and then there's a blank, and then said, what should the next number be? And so the idea is, well, you figure out what the pattern of the numbers is, and then one of the things below, we'll say 12, 15, 21, or 36. Well, if you figure out the correct pattern, then you know which one to fill in the blank. The problem is there's literally, not figuratively, an infinite number of ways to derive any series of numbers. So I can write an equation that will make every number that is part of the multiple choice answer the correct one for that sequence of. So there really is, and I'm sure all of us have had that experience. If you think, on the other hand, where they give you a reading question, here's a paragraph, read it, and then they say, what is the point of this paragraph? And there's 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences that you choose from. Well, the point for whom? Because if I read a paragraph about a dog, and I had my favorite dog in the whole world that I loved when I was a kid, and that reminds me of it, that's probably what the paragraph is about to me. But somebody else was mauled by a dog that morning, that paragraph is going to be totally different to them. And yet when we sit there in these environments, what we have to do is try and focus our minds and think, what does somebody else want me to think when I read this passage? Which is a really narrowing of the human experience. And it's banal because everybody's taken 100,000 multiple choice tests. And so we don't even see it anymore of how narrowing and focusing this is. And that's what I think, like you said, with philosophy and hopefully the history of philosophy and pondering these things, is we go, hey, wait a second. I think all of these answers are not correct. Or I don't think these answers apply to me.
There's no box for that.
There's no box. That's right.
Yeah. Or let alone, or the question's ill.
Well, so if that's the case, if you're trying to check the box that is the truth for the person that wrote the question, you're guessing at the cumulative experience of the person that wrote the question more than the actual truth, because that person only knows what they've been told. We don't know. We don't know what that person's thinking. So what's the answer? How do you do that better?
Wes.
Milo.
That's one of those questions that would take too much time, but I think I can give it I can give it a shot. It depends what you're looking for. If you want someone to be part of a corporation, you want them to get the answer that you want them to give. You want them to fit in. Basically, you want that, which works very well for the larger. I mean, the thing is, we need that too. I mean, who's going to make our cars or our, my paints, my tubes of paint? I don't think I'd even be a painter if I couldn't get tubes of paint made by someone who has followed that. So we need everyone. I mean, the truth is, we need everyone. It so happens that some of us, we'll just say, were lied to as kids and decided that it bothered us. And so now a little detector goes off. Actually, Wes and I were talking about this. And maybe we don't know the answer to things, but we have pretty good ideas of what doesn't work. And so I guess there's a place for that as well. People you could call it progressive or whatever, people who change things, who are not content with the way things are. So it just depends on who the test is for, I mean, just yesterday I was reading a line and it goes, education is recreation. Well, now that's a Greek thought. To recreate yourself through education. I wouldn't suggest you go throwing that around. That isn't, you see what I mean? It sounds counter, but here he is. He's talking 2,500 years ago, and he's talking about how, education is recreating oneself. Recreating. Well, that doesn't work for any corporation that I've heard of, although today is probably a better time than other times.
Why?
Because I think that I think people, by and large, are smarter, and that they realize in a corporation you need a few mavericks. You need a few to grow. Anything that's going to grow needs change. That's what growth is, a form of change, of course. So for a company to grow, just having automatons or whatever, workers,
By workers, you mean slaves.
You need both. You need really. There's a place for everyone.
And maybe that's the point. There is a place for everyone. If you're just joining us, you're listening to Milo Redwood and Wes Cecil, the professor and the Madman, on KPTZ 91.9 FM in Port Townsend.
Well, another example to answer your question, too, is to say, if there's a question and you allow an essay answer, then someone can write an essay, short, even a paragraph, and you can have 10 people give you 10 different answers, all of which can be equally good. But then you're back to the notion of judgment. You can't run that through a computer scanner and have it go, well, yes or no. But you can judge that and say, we never thought about that, but that's really quite a fine answer. Or you can go, in theory, we could sort of agree with that, but that's so poorly presented that we don't really like that answer. And so those, so it is possible to give a test where you let students have all kinds of range of potentially correct answers based on the merits of their arguments. Part of this also, by the way, is the notion that just because there's more than one right answer doesn't mean everything is correct. It just means there's a range of correct answers and also a range of possibly incorrect answers, right?
So here's a question for both of you. If that's true, and you obviously spend some time at this, you spend some time with thought, both of you, do you ever test yourself? Do you ever test your thoughts? And if you do, how do you do it?
I would say most of my day I'm testing myself. This is why close friends, and if you have a handful, you're doing very well. Close friends will call, let's see, how would you say, malarkey. They'll call malarkey on you.
We're on the radio.
The malarkey callers.
I forgot. Good job, Milo. I was about to say something. Lucky you took this one first.
Now, here's one of those things where if my actions and my words are in conflict, a friend of mine will say, "Hey," and sure, it very likely will irritate me in the moment. Who wants to be called on something that he's so? But as I see it, that's the only hope. Well, hope isn't the word, but anyway, that's what I live for is, it gets musical. It really gets musical. A discord, whether it's a philosophical discord or an emotional discord or intellectual or whatever, a discord for whatever reason hurts me. I think I was born that way. I really do. By the time I was 3 or 4, it hurt me to see Grandma saying one thing and doing another. For whatever reason, that's just the way I was wired. So good friends will point that out. Today, of course, Facebook and other things have brought the definition of friend down to an all-time low. They pretty much made it. I don't even know what it means anymore. But a lot can be improved when a person just defines what is a friend and really, really thinks about that. What makes a friend to you? Only you will know. But what is a friend? Anyway, so a friend will call.
Yeah, I think another way, I think that's correct. Another way of thinking about this too is to say, and I think it was what Milo meant by discord and harmony, is, I've one of my fundamental beliefs, and this is where you want to start questioning things, is I believe in the notion of thriving. Am I really thriving? And if not, why not? And that's a changing target because we're not in stasis. And so what was maybe great for me 5 years ago, at some point becomes not great. And so I need to change and adjust. And so I'm constantly trying to reflect on, am I living in a way that I feel both emotionally and physically and psychologically is helping me thrive? And boy, it's amazing when you ask a question like that, how easy it is to go, well, I feel good physically, but, I'm not sleeping well or something. You can find these areas and you go, why is that? And once you ask that, boy, you often get a lot of feedback and information. But outside, good friends are excellent.
And that's important, I think, because internally you have internal tests of yourself, but you need discourse. And that seems to be a very Greek... I don't know what I would call it. A very Greek. You need people. Let me put it this way. You brought up music. Yeah. And I remember listening to Ray Schroff. He's a DJ here one time. And he was talking. He plays jazz. And he says, I'm Ray Schroff. I'm your Mojo Navigator. Mojo Navigator.
That's a good job title.
Cool is that? And I think when it comes to thought, you need a Mojo Navigator too. You never can do that by yourself. You need people giving you their thoughts and ideas. And when you speak about Facebook, if that is the substitution for sitting in a room talking with people, we're in trouble.
Yeah, we're in trouble on that front, no doubt. But, I mean, one element of that, or the other extreme of that, which is sort of constant for us, is we submit ourselves to judgment, which we talked about earlier, but of people who don't know us, which is bizarre. So we tend, I think this is observationally correct. In general, I see people care a lot more about what people who don't know them think of them than of the people who do know them. So if I say, I'm going to save my money and buy this really nice car and it's going to impress... Who? It's going to impress people you don't know. True story. I read this in the newspaper and I looked it up online to make sure it was true. But when the Hummers, those huge SUVs were coming out and they were really selling really well for a while, shockingly enough, they said one of the reasons that owners cited that were great to own a Hummer was how impressed the people in the drive-through line at McDonald's and such were when you drove up in a Hummer. That's a mental illness. If you feel good because people you don't know who work in the fast food drive-up line will go, wow, that guy must be great because he has... See, that's just bizarre. At the same time, to then not care what people who do know you think, which I think is those are almost coterminous. They seem to work together on a sliding scale. So we'll do something awful to people we do know so that we can get a Hummer to impress people we don't know. And then we feel great, I guess. But it's going to be temporary.
Yeah.
It's very strange. And so that need for self-reflection is also a need, and the need for friends to help you with self-reflection seems to run counter to our culture, again, in which is really much more significantly interested in surface appearance and coherence within sort of a popular milieu, but with strangers. You're trying to impress strangers most of the time, not impress people who know you.
Yeah. Yeah, another way to look at it is that thinking, you can have that free range thinking. I mean, obviously you can sit around and do all that, but I'm more intrigued of the action that then follows. And so the friend comes in, again, when those two are in utter conflict perhaps, or are off a bit or whatever, and that a disharmony is there. I mean, in a way, we're defining hypocrisy. Right? I mean, that's pretty much the word. So a good friend will point out hypocrisy in you because they're your friend. They want you to thrive, and so hypocrisy denotes not thriving. Right? Yeah.
And I think part of it too, you may not even have intellectualized it. You may not even be actually fully aware of what you're doing, which I think is often the case. So you may be thinking, I've got these ideas, I'm doing the right thing. And then somebody from the outside, I'm trying to think of a concrete example. Well, let's say you think, I want to be healthy. I want to be healthy. That's really one of my big goals. That's not crazy. That's a perfectly reasonable goal. And so you start maybe running, and you start running and running and running. And clearly you're damaging your health. And you can see this. People do this. They'll run and their knees start, and their feet and their ankles, and they're getting surgeries, and they're doing it for their health. And at some point, if you're getting surgeries for your health, it's sort of, it's easy to go wrong. And then again, hopefully friends are people who step in and say, look, I know you're trying to do what's right. You're not just being hypocritical,
right?
But wow, you're sort of, this has gone off the rails, and it's hard. And it is, and there's so many things to balance, and we're changing, and our environments are changing. And so, yeah, it's kind of a never-ending process.
There's a lot of material there. I mean, now this isn't the nicest thing I've ever said, but I was thinking about how once in a while you'll hear someone complain about life a lot. They actually seem to hate life. Then they'll go to the gym, and you're kind of like, why are you trying to live longer?
Yeah, exactly.
Why are you trying to extend your life if you don't love your life? It's just one of those. Yeah, it's just one of those things.
Well, you've touched on a couple things here that almost go to the heart of maybe it's time to redefine mental illness. I mean, I've heard, and maybe it was from Wes, about Native American cultures where that concept of mental illness was applied to specific people that got more than they needed and didn't want to share with the rest. And I'd never thought about it that way, but evidently that's not a new concept.
No. Yeah, that notion of, mental illness is always normed within societies. And so what some societies will tolerate, other societies will not tolerate, and other societies will go, no, that's just fine. But yeah, in some societies, if you're, we call it hoarding. In some societies, they would say, well, that's because it could actually damage the tribe. If you're a small enough group and somebody is taking all the food or all of the material goods, they're actually a threat. And so you had to call it a mental illness, so you have a reason to intervene. But no, I think it is. It is mentally ill. I think quite literally. What did you call it?
Well, I'm a little hesitant to call it. I would call it neurotic. It's split, and in all fairness, Wes has heard this plenty of times. In all fairness, the human brain, because it is split at least three ways, reptilian, mammal to just fully prefrontal cortex. So basically the most human part all the way down to reptile. We are split physically. Our brains are split. So in some ways, to be a human is to be neurotic. In some ways, I think that's fair if you follow the etymology. So to be split, I would say, is a given. So even if you embrace that, let's just say you go, oh yeah, I'm split. My mammal side jumps off and I start this impossible love thing or whatever you're split. Even if you fully embrace that, the prefrontal still, I would hope, comes in and goes, yeah, all right, I'm split. Now, how can I get back to making my life better? And by better, I mean better for you as an individual. Like basically, what needs work? And just set back on it, admitting that, yeah, we're split. We're split.
And part of it is one of the splits is the communal versus the individual.
Exactly. Yeah.
We're communal animals. We live in societies. We can only thrive in society. We cannot thrive on our own. We'll just die. Because if you only drive on the freeway you built, you're going to be in trouble, right? I mean, so these sorts of structures really help the individual thrive. But for the individual, it's always how much of my individuality and myself and my ideas and my drives do I sacrifice so that I can fit in with a community. So we're on this radio show, and Milo had to use the fascinating word malarkey, which I don't believe I have ever heard pass his lips.
For the record, I don't know the etymology of that, so
I want to know the etymology of malarkey. But so that's a very small it's a teeny tiny sacrifice, but because of the communal norms that we live in, we're not supposed to use certain other words, which is fine. But those sorts of forces are always challenging us, and they're basically unsolvable because they're an internal conflict. We want to be loved, we want to have groups, we want to have friends, and we want to be ourselves. We want to express ourselves, and so trying to negotiate those is. Boy, that's the human condition. That's why we need philosophy. It's because the human condition isn't solvable. If we had a solvable problem, it would be math and we'd be in good shape. But we don't have one of those.
It's probably just as well too.
Yeah, it'd be more fun this way.
Exactly.
What was the answer? 7, I think, was the.
Yeah. Well, the FCC has tried to define what those words are that may be offensive in their excretory in nature, obscene, and when you think about it, that goes to exactly what you're saying. Is we try to define some undefinable, and words are important.
Yeah.
Etymology. You just talked about neurotic. How important, or what? Let me think about. I don't really know how to phrase this. Okay, you have a word and it comes from a certain place.
Right.
It comes from that place for certain reasons. And then as we use that word, that original meaning is not known or it goes away, but it has a beating heart. And
well said.
And how important is it for us to know what that beating heart is?
Well, I mean, that's definitely up to the individual. I basically live for that because I just I love getting to the roots of things. I was born that way. My mother, I would just tear stuff apart, not to be destructive, to see how it worked. Always a screwdriver in a hand, pliers. Age 4. So it's just in my nature. But here's an easy one. This one's probably been overdone. But the word nice, we say someone's nice and all. Well, if you knew the etymology, you would be very careful about using that word because it turns out that it actually means ignorant fool. That's what that word means. And it goes nescience. It meant without science. So not to know. That's what nice comes from, not to know. Whereas the word kind almost definitely goes to kinship. So if you're kind to someone, it's because you feel a kinship. If you're kind to the earth, it's because you feel a kinship to the earth. Nice is really, I use it because I'm a smart aleck, but it's a real, like, for someone to say he had a nice personality really is a funny thing to say. Persona comes from mask. Pretty much everyone knows that. Persona comes from mask, the word mask. So to say he has a ignorant mask, it's just, so again, I like it because I like stories. So to get a story behind a word and to get hopefully the original intent of the word.
And it's also important not necessarily to have the full etymologies of every word, but you want to know the real words that are key to your life, what they mean and how you're using them. But also the capacity to make distinctions. I think I mentioned this before, where if you look on anything online, reviews, YouTube comments, everything is either the best or the worst. There's apparently nothing mediocre ever produced. It's either the greatest that's ever existed, and the person below says, no, this is the worst that's ever existed. The lack of the language to express a sense of distinctions is itself a sort of incapacity. And so I think knowing words is also a method of being able to express your unique experience with the world. So what the words that are important to you that you might want to use carefully will be different from the next person, but it allows you to take language and your experiences and your culture, which shape you in so many ways, but then use those tools to then express some of yourself back in it. If you don't have any concept of the language that you're utilizing in the day-to-day manner, particularly with things that are important to you, then the great trouble, I think, the classic example, again, probably overused, is the word love that Milo mentioned earlier. So often I hear people say, oh, I love you, and then some other person says, I love you. And in my mind, I think both those people mean totally different things. Mm-hmm. What this person means when they say they love them is totally different from what this person means when they say they love you. And that is the quick recipe for relational disaster. Because even if both people are completely sincere and there's no, sort of other games going on, they say, I love you, which they think means these three things, and the other person says, I love you, and means these three things. And so they're actually hearing something that the other person is not saying because they have no clearly articulated notion of what it means. And so if I say, I love you, and that means I'm going to get you flowers and take you out to dinners and we're going to have nice vacations, and you say you love me, and I hear, oh, we're going to stay home, we're going to have this quiet life, and you're going to make a lot of dinners. Nobody is evil. No one is being bad. No one's even being mean-spirited. It's just that the language they're using is so indefinite that that collision, right? Here comes pain. Pain is on the way, even though you have two, in this case, potentially all totally well-meaning people.
And this may explain why the word love is something that I use sparingly. Yeah. And I heard recently that, okay, I love you means I really have to get off the phone now. You know what I mean?
I hadn't heard that's true. That's great.
Ever since I heard that, I've used it even
I'm going to start using that. That's great.
It's an amazing word. And in English, we're here speaking English. I'm sorry, you guys, you got me just like firing. I really, are there languages that do things better in certain arenas? I mean, we speak English and everybody's whoopee English. You can go to Germany and people speak English. But are there languages now that do some things, intangible things, better than what we're doing now? Are there things that can't be explained in English?
Wes, that's definitely you.
Yeah, so this is a big debate, by the way, in language studies. I think in general, no. You can express pretty much anything in pretty much any language. The key, however, is the facility of expression is totally different. So, and the feel of the language. If you have a word that means you have many relatives who love you, you've been raised in a stable environment, you feel loved, and that your community is behind you, and therefore you're free in the world, which some languages do. African languages, by the way, tend to be rich in these sorts of words. So they have one word that means that. It's so much easier to express that concept than to say, no, I just feel like I was raised by a wonderful family and they gave me these gifts and I have their support and I live in a rich community. If I can just say a word that talks about that kind of, let's call it wealth, and then I can string together some more words, then it does really shade the types of expressions that are easier and less easy to make. But basically you can express anything in every language, but and also I think one that we don't want to go on this whole linguistic rabbit hole, which I'm happy to do, by the way, but I'll try to rein myself in. The other thing is the way languages are structured are very different, and so French, for instance, doesn't have a very large vocabulary relative to English, but it's very rich in phrases, and so there's all of these double and triple entendre phrases that people in French will use very regularly that creates this rich experience, despite the fact that compared to English, they don't have quite as many words, but the way they actually construct sentences, particularly for literary purposes, is actually quite different and in some ways very rich, much richer than English, which can get quite dry at times compared to like a French or French language. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wes Cecil and Milo Redwood, if you're just joining us, the professor and the madman on tossed salad, KPTZ, Port Townsend. So what else has been on your mind? Milo?
I
hate putting people on the spot.
You just put them on the spot.
Yeah. But,
yeah, okay.
Okay, there you go.
I mean, on the ride over here, money's still a great topic.
It's a
great topic.
We're going to need another hour.
Yeah. Ting, ting. Yeah, on the way over, we were just talking about how you can have very loving, well-educated, and I mean that in the deepest sense, just beautiful people. We'll just say a family, and then someone dies. And then, I mean, maybe you've been through this where suddenly there's money on the table. Someone left some money, and suddenly they're not people anymore. For a little while, they turn to animals. It intrigues me. It really intrigues me because minutes before, and so money's still truly one of my favorite topics just because I see it as being, I probably mentioned this, but I see it as being truly one of the best mirrors you can find. In fact, I have yet to find one. How our relationship to money as an individual is, in my view, the perfect mirror because it just, since it is a symbol and since everyone really seems to have a little different spin on what money means to them and all that, it really gives you a chance of seeing what you're about, your relationship to money. Because it's just math and symbol. It's symbol. And math, a little math. So our relationship to money is just, it's beautiful. I really can't think of another one. Love, when I think of love, in this case, I'm thinking of romantic love. It's a great mirror. There's no doubt about it. The problem is it's not quite as clean a mirror as money. It's a relate.
But what makes it beautiful?
The clarity, money, just the clarity. Because it's all, basically, my relationship with money is all me. It's bouncing off of the money. The money's the same. There are lots of examples, but I mean, $10,000 to one person is just, it's just a different thing to someone else. That's what I mean? That's a loose example. But maybe a better example is when here's one. Someone gets fired. Actually, I had this happen. A person got fired, and she's smart enough and also mischievous enough to want to mess with me. So here's what she says. She says, "I just got fired." And then she gives a blank stare, and I don't know what to do. And so I see a grin coming up, and then I say, "Congratulations." See, it could have gone either way. It could have easily gone either way. She could have gone into a deep depression for years, actually, from being fired. Someone else would have and has gone into a depression. Someone else rebounds, rebuilds their life according to them from the inside out. And being fired was actually one of the most important things in their life. Anyway, that's another example of how money, livelihood, and all, so much can be. I just like the clarity of it.
So money as a mirror, a person's relationship to money instantly shows something that may be hidden previously.
A lot.
Well, the example I like, and we've talked about this before, is people who are married, I know people have been married for years, or they're in a relationship for long-term committed. So they have kids, they have a house, they have sex together, they have separate bank accounts. His money and her money. And you're sharing everything in your life. You're sharing bodies, you're sharing genes, you're sharing kids. His money and her money. And I'm not against it. I'm not opposed to it. I don't care. If it helps your relationship work, that's great. But it's wow, we will share in everything except that. That's a lot of people draw that line because what they find is it generates so many conflicts in a relationship. To try and communicate about it, to try and be clear, to set priorities, and to share it, that the best thing is to just parse it out and then don't talk about it, right? And to me, that is just one of those fascinating, just again, it's a mirror, right? It just tells you that there is this, in the center of this relationship is two different views. In fact, such different views on such a central issue that the solution has been to just separate it to his and hers.
That is a fascinating concept because we share bath towels and
right, you're sharing everything, right?
We don't, or really, I think we understand it. We don't even think about it. We live in a culture that makes that okay, or it's totally understandable to us because it's money. Money is like a sugar cube. It's like something everybody grabs for. Right. So,
yeah.
But it is a very strange concept, separate bank accounts.
Yeah. And I said, I'm not against it. If it makes your relationship work, fine. But to me, it just seems like the strangest that I would be willing to share all of that, but not the money. And hence, this is, the example of like an inheritance that Milo was talking about. When you have a group of people, usually siblings, who are looking at that pile of money, that you would think, we're raised together, we're brothers and sisters, we're going to share, everything's going to be happy-go-lucky. The history of this is not that. The history of this is, where's the lawyers, right? Let's get some lawyers because that always makes every situation better.
I lived through that recently.
Sorry about that.
I'm living through that now. And it is very thought-provoking because everything split totally equally. I'm to the point where I'm happy that the person, or my parents are not alive to see how extremely complicated that can be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
But anyway.
So some of the Taoists, they actually consider leaving money to your children as a curse, which is just a profound way of viewing things. They thought that it was just like cursing your children. Isn't that an odd? It's just completely opposite of, yeah.
And conversely is why do people die with a lot of money? Why wouldn't you take care of this when you're alive? Either get rid of it or do something with it or put in a pile and light it on fire or I don't know. But obviously at some point they just decide, well, I don't want to deal with this. Let those people, like pass that problem on to the next generation. It's just
we have defined money as a problem.
Well, but it becomes right. It becomes this real significant. I'm trying to think of examples of. The only example I really springs to mind is King Lear, right? When Lear tried to separate it all out, that didn't work out well either. So maybe there's no good solution, as so often the case. But yeah, it's a wonderful mirror on ourselves and our relationships.
And you're tuned to KPTZ 91.9 FM in Port Townsend. We have maybe another 10, 15 minutes with Wes Cecil and Milo Redwood here on Toss Salad at 3:30. Deb Hammond comes in to read poetry. I don't exactly know what poetry, but we will. You stick with us, and we will find out. So, gentlemen, we have a little bit of time. There's just so much territory to talk about, and we've hit on money. We've hit on love. We've talked some about words and languages. All these things are, they float around us. We don't exactly stand up and grab them, but it's necessary for us, I think, that one thing I get out of it is how important it is to listen to other people or to have that discourse with people that are outside of our own experience, to bring in different ideas, thoughts. My impression is that both of you do this quite well. Has there been anything that has come to mind lately that has intrigued you, made you think?
I'm going to blame Milo for this, and that is Stirner.
Oh.
So he was a German philosopher. Basically wrote one work, "The Ego and Its Own," I believe is the English translation. And boy, I mean, this is by the way, this is why I think it's good to read good material. It's, like I said before, you don't want to read too much. That's one of my definite struggles. Is I just think reading is the solution to everything, which is incorrect. But but reading someone like Stirner, and it's not that Stirner's right. It's not that the Greek philosophers are right or that the Taoist philosophers are right, but they have such powerful voices, and they raise issues so clearly and so strongly that it sort of shakes you, or at least shakes me, and I kind of go, "Holy cow!" And Stirner is really, I mean, it is the philosophy of individualism taken to its absolute extreme extent. I don't know how you could be any more individualistic than he is. And, I mean, there's all kinds of limitations and problems with it, but it is such a cool glass of water in a desert, and you don't realize how continuously we get messages of go along to get along, everybody let's all just, sacrifice a little for the group, and how constant that is until you read someone like Stirner and you're like, oh my God, wow, this is such a sort of a vitamin or a reminder. And so I think reading the classics of all the cultures really has that power. But Stirner was the one for me recently. And it's Milo's fault because he turned me.
Well, you can blame Jung because I came to him through Carl Jung. Yes, Stirner. I mean, it's hard. I would say that the breakthroughs. Well, for one thing, I live for breakthroughs. I mean, that's far. But a lot's riding with when I finally defined what I consider to be life for myself. Like, what is the difference in a life and an existence? For example, if you're imprisoned, is that a life or is that an existence? I mean, it's really up to the individual to figure that out. Some people, I suppose, would flourish in prison. I'm probably not one of those, but so first to do that, and then to just set about making it, getting to the roots. So Stirner's great for that because he doesn't apologize. Here's a man. By the way, he died just before Nietzsche was born, right?
Yeah,
something like that. Nietzsche's another one. How about this? The beauty of the Greeks, some of the Germans, and others, is that ultimately they're saying yes to life. Even if they have a sword in their hand, even if they're going out to battle, this could be the last day of their life, but they're saying yes to life. And that's
I think that's
right?
absolutely right.
Yay,
Absolutely, because they're yay-sayers. Yeah. And another thing that both of us do that I think is interesting that I don't see a lot of other people doing is we're constantly running experiments on ourselves. Mm-hmm. I mean, continuously. We almost always, each of us, have at least one, usually one going on. An example, I think, Milo, right now you're not drinking, right?
Yeah, so this is day 33,
day
doing
33,
40.
Hasn't been, but I read this article about the health benefits of moderate drinking, and I did some research, and so I went for 40 days. We could talk about why it's always 40 days, where I drank the same amount every day, the maximum amount allowable as moderate drinking for
Maniacs.
For my weight, for my size, right? So I found a medical advice. Say, here's how much I could drink, and so I'd pour that every day. And I've tried not eating meat, changing my sleep pattern, changing my exercise patterns, not reading certain amounts. God, what's some of the experiments that you've run? Drinking, not drinking.
Yeah.
Trying to think of other experiments that you've painting. You did the painting one.
Right.
I did one with writing.
Yeah. Painting. That's a long. Basically, I did a series of 1,000 12 by 12s. It took about 18 months, and the experiment. First of all, it was some of the best 18 months of my life. Because as you know, when you get a project that you yourself want to do, and you have made the place to do it and all, you know what that's like. It's timeless. Well, anyway, the idea was to see how music affected my choice of colors and form. So basically the idea, sit down with no pre-thinking, choose music, and wait. And so yeah. Anyway, after 1,000, what I ended up, this probably won't be a surprise to you, what ended up happening is my favorite paintings of the entire group tended actually to come through silence. So in the end, silence won out. Close runners-up were Neil Young. Yeah.
Bam.
And Neil Young. And
Now, and then so I was trying to think of some other ones. So I've done no coffee, which turns out to be really good for me. So I tend not to drink coffee. I tried to drink coffee again.
Wait a minute.
On another experiment. I tried to drink coffee for a while as an experiment. It turned out that's a bad idea. So I went back to not drinking coffee. No TV. I haven't had a TV for, 30 years, I don't think, because I ran that trial a while back, and a couple decades back, and I just found that it was just it's not good for me, so I got rid of that. And so these sorts of experiments, I think, a lot of times there's changes that we can think about making. Well, you don't have to, quit your job and divorce your wife and move to a commune in some place. You can just go, I think I want to run an experiment, and I'm not going to, I'm not going to drink coffee, or I'm going to drink more. I need to drink a lot more, and I'm going to try that. And I'm not going to not drink at all. Or, there's so many different aspects of your life that you might ponder changing and inflecting, and then track it, and then try and be honest with, do you feel better? Do you feel worse? And, I felt terrible when I drank all the time. It turns out I really like to binge drink. I'm a binge drinker,
That's what I was thinking. Have you ever taken like that moderate drinking scenario? You would have one glass of wine for 40 days and done it all in one day.
Yeah.
And there you go. How'd that turn out for
I like
you?
that a lot better. I'm a binge drinker. No, honestly, what I've discovered is I like to not drink for a while, and then I like to drink a lot.
Well, yeah, I see a certain benefit to that myself. So out of these experiments that you both run, which I think is an excellent idea, actually, is there one that you would recommend? That's a tough one. And I talk about putting it on the spot, but you're talking to an audience on the radio. We don't know who's listening.
Yeah.
This is an amorphous group of people out there that are waiting for an answer.
All right. How about, well, first, this is just a slight, yeah. Anyway, Diogenes, at one point, he sees a guy tuning, is it lyre? It's a guitar. Basically,
A lyre.
Lyre, yeah. I was saying lyre. Anyway, he's this kid is just doing it, and Diogenes walks by and he says, spend all that time tuning your instrument and you're not even tuning your soul. So first, I'll just refresh your memory. When I use the word soul, I'm talking about that which in you wants to live and to make something live. So you could almost say libido, but in a wider sense, not necessarily sexually, although, wanting to have a child would probably be in there, right? But I'm thinking more in terms of art, music, writing, what have you. So when I use soul, that I want to be very clear, because that word has been run almost an impossible etymology, by the way, the word soul. It could easily come from the word sea, of the sea, but that's dubious. Anyway, so I would say something like, figure out what makes you want to live, and then do little things like throw your TV out the window. Maybe start there. it's kind of wide. Diet, I would say diet and diet. Start with physical. I would say start with physical change. Like do 6 weeks of no meat, whatever, or meat, whatever. Yeah, it starts, as far as I can tell, it starts from the body. You change your mind, right?
Yeah, I would say look at the pattern that you live in, whatever it is. And if there's anyone that you're dubious about, forget everybody else. Who cares about everybody else? But there's one you're dubious. But if you think, maybe I spend a little too much time on the internet, or why do I read the paper? It's just filled with crap that upsets me every day. Then run the experiment. Then just pick that and go. If it's already sending up a little flag, if it's got a little nagging itch in the back of your brain where you kind of go, well, then you'll find out. 40 days. 40 days is it's a philosopher's month, it's called. And it's 40 days, 40 nights in the desert. There seems to be a psychological and physiological reason for this. That's been demonstrated to be scientifically, somewhat valid, by the way. And then, then you'll know. And then you can say, well, after 40 days without the internet, I decided I'm happy if I use it less, but I get a lot of joy and pleasure out of it. So, maybe I'm fine with it. Maybe I'll use it a little less, but basically, I think it's good. Or you might discover, I don't need this. I'm much happier without it.
You I'll make sure to win some friends. Unplug from the news. No news for 40 days. Start there. No news. No radio. No cheating. Try that for 40 days. Just as a
that's a good one.
Just as a start.
Oh I could get behind that.
And you can ask yourself, has it improved your life? A lot of this is, just a critical thinking. Criticism gets a big black eye.
Yeah, and
right.
And we've talked about this too. And I just mentioned it sort of in passing, but I shouldn't make so light of things because I do see people, who will blow up their life. They'll get a divorce or they'll quit a job. And I often wonder, I think, was that really this big thing? What was the problem or what was bothering you? When there's so many small things that you can start with and just try. The stakes seem lower, but I think sometimes they're more significant. It's sometimes the things that seem small that are more pleasing. You may not need to change your whole life. Right. Just changing a few small things, you might go, well, actually, I'm really happy with 90%, and it was just this one corner that, for this whatever reason, was sort of bothering me. And if I get that a little bit better, then,
tune another string.
Yeah, tune another string. I like that. Tune another string.
One string at a time.
One string at a time.
Wes Cecil and Milo Redwood. I am running out of time, but I do want to end with something that I've always been impressed with, not knowing Milo, but on Wes's lecture series, it seems that I don't know if you do this on purpose or not, but there is usually a recommendation for reading, and it may be, and I'm reluctant to say this because it's like when I have people come in and play music. It's not the music, Desert Island music. It's not that one shining thing that I'm recommending, but is there something that you've read that you would recommend for the audience to read?
You go first.
Well, just because I just read it, I'm going to say 1984. If you haven't read 1984, George Orwell in a while, read it. But by the way, note that the book is told retrospectively. The society that the main character's living in has failed. And so that's important to know because some people miss this. Otherwise, it's a hugely depressing book, but it doesn't end that way. So just as a note, but yeah, 1984. There's a lot of good material in there to think about.
Let's see. Anything Greek. Lucian, the satirist Lucian. Oh, definitely. If you can find them, 8 volumes, funny, accessible, all that. But I would say Thus Spake Zarathustra, Nietzsche.
Yeah, Nietzsche.
And then, believe it or not, Tao Te Ching, find a translation that rings for you because there could easily be 100 or more translations. So find one of those. And then whatever you do, don't read Max Stirner. Don't read him. What's it called? The Ego in its Own. Yeah, don't read that. That was one I would tell you, don't read that because you'll wreck your life if you read that one. So stay away
from Max Stirner.
Man, I'll take your word for that, and I'm hopefully there'll be plenty of people out there reading 1984 and Lucian, by the way. Which, maybe a bit of a stretch, but we'll hope for the best here. Yeah. I want to thank both of you. It's been very fun talking to you, and it's just the beautiful thing about having community radio is to have people like yourselves come in and just talk about what's on your mind. It's been a pleasure to have both of you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.